Yeah. All right. Well, okay, look, this brings us to a rather large subject called Dark Side of the Moon, which we have to spend some time discussing. There's obviously been tons and tons of.
All right, did I make it clear? No Pink Floyd questions?
Oh, right.
Sorry.
No, no, we
Yeah.
hadn't said that. All right. Well, thanks for coming, Mr. Parsons.
See you.
No, 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 not at all. I don't want to rehash everything because obviously there. I mean, there's a great classic albums of it. There's lots and lots of footage of you talking about it. But one thing I wanted to ask before we even get to Dark Side is, um, so you worked on Adam Hart Mother all the way through, including the mixing. Then was Metal not made at Abbey Road? And that's because you missed that one, and Obscured by Clouds, which is the soundtrack album, which I think was an aberration in a lot of ways. But Metal was much more of a straight ahead Pink Floyd record.
Yeah, it was just Atom Heart Mother and Dark Side that I was involved with.
But didn't you do some live sound for them preceding the sessions for Dark Side?
They were pretty much concurrent. I was I was out doing the live show with them during the making of the album
Oh, right. Okay.
and and after and after.
Because I know a big part of them getting ready to make the record was playing everything live, like sort of the reverse of what any band would do now. You don't ever play your songs before they're released, and but they were really trying out the record. And I know there are famously some things that were completely different, but generally the shape of that album was
The title is one thing that changed. It was called Eclipse
right.
when they were playing it live during the recording period, and Dark Side of the Moon came later.
And so was it scheduled so that they could be playing live during the recording process, or it's just the way it worked out? I mean, how much of a plan was that to continue to play live while going through the recording?
Oh, I think they just like to keep their date sheet fairly busy.
Right.
So we would go out on the road for 3 or 4 weeks, or then back in the studio for 3 or 4 weeks. It's fairly intensive schedule, as I remember.
Right. And so you were never not working with them through that period, basically.
Not much else going on. No, you're right.
Yeah. Now, I've heard you say in a few interviews that you made sure that you were the engineer on all those sessions. But I know from some of the other interviews that it was hard to have control over that. And some studios would purposefully swap out the engineers on long-running projects. So was it difficult to make sure that you were the engineer, or was it just a matter of saying, they want me to do this record, I want to do the record, we're doing it?
I think I went to the bookings lady, Vera Samuel, and said, please try and make sure that I do all these sessions, and don't book me on anything else unless. I mean, I think there was one one situation where I had to work early next morning and then come in, do a 10 to 1 in the morning, and then start with Floyd at 2 in the afternoon. I think that happened a couple of times, but other than that, it was pretty easy to be the only engineer. I just didn't want to share credit with anybody else.
Right. And I've seen that you spent a lot of time getting the drum sound at the very beginning of the project. And then that drum sound, even though you were switching studios and you're going out on the road and coming back and the same kit was being used, was the sound. So can you just tell me, because I mean, you would never spend more than half an hour getting a drum sound normally, because you've got to get in there and record because the session's going to be over. So what was the process, and what was it you were actually looking for that was different from the kind of drum sound you would normally get?
Well, it wasn't what I was looking for. I think it was what Nick was looking for, and it was fairly frustrating in the first few sessions, or perhaps only the first couple of sessions, where he did not feel that the drum sound was what he wanted. But somehow I managed to find the right combination of what I thought was right and what he thought was right, and then he completely let go. He just assumed that I would apply the same principles to all the songs, other than the ones that he'd been a little bit difficult over. And yeah, he just just let it go. Just let me record the drums, and he never made any further comment
Right.
after that
And
initial
so
period.
to your ears, what was the crux of what it was he was trying to get out of it? Do you know even? Or you just got there and then that was that?
To be honest, I don't think it actually changed that much. I think it was pretty close to what we ended up with. He was either just testing me, just to see if I could do anything radical that would make an enormous difference to what his drum sounded like. But he had a good kit. He had good drums, good toms, good snare drum. It didn't take a lot of hard work to just to get that onto tape. It
Yeah,
really
I
didn't.
mean, it's a fantastic drum sound, but it isn't that out of the ordinary. It's just a really, really good drum sound. But I mean, I've had times with artists where you start recording and they're unhappy with the sound of their instrument, and by coming in and listening and talking about what they want you to change, they actually go out and sort of adjust what they're doing. And by doing very little, they end up in a place. So I wonder if he was changing his playing as much as whatever small tweaks you're making.
I think he's one of the lighter touched drummers out there. He didn't ever really whack them, and that might be part of the sound. Just his gentle touch on the drums.
Right. Well, you certainly get tone that way.
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, there's so many great things about the record, but they're all documented. The thing that the rototoms were just left behind in the studio and then become this iconic part of one of the songs on the record and so like that. So we don't have to go over that too much. But one of the things I wanted to,
What's interesting was that there were more rototom notes than there were rototoms. So we had to retune them for each chord change.
and so did you
And
record
punch in.
all of chord one out, back in for chord one, so get all the chord ones, or did you record in a progression so that you knew the part was going to work?
A combination of both, as I remember.
Right.
But once we discovered we had to do all this retuning, we said, well, why don't we do all the B minors and then all the C's and or whatever the notes were. But it was fairly painstaking and a fairly stressful punch in, punch out process.
Right.
Because no undo button.
No, and I'm assuming you're recording them rather ambiently as well. Right.
I'm not sure about that.
Maybe
I
not.
think we've been reasonably close up, and the ambience is coming from an EMT plate, which is pretty much the only reverb used on the whole album.
Right.
Just,
And so
EMT.
what do you remember? Because obviously that's a very happy accident, but it's an accident because you didn't even know there were going to be rototoms. So what was originally going on there? Do you remember?
I don't. It would have been pretty dull without the rototoms, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
So,
because I was trying to imagine it with like normal drum fills, and that wouldn't
yeah.
really necessarily. I mean, you could do it on the toms, but it wouldn't have been that.
For some reason, every version that I can think of, both every live version of it that I can remember, had rototoms on it.
Right. It's a really funny thing with that album because I think it's so well known by the people who've heard it, which is pretty much almost everyone on the planet, that even when you see footage of like Gilmour out in the studio working out parts, he's just doing a take and then go back and do another take, and everything he's playing just sounds totally wrong until he plays the thing that's on the record. Even though it's all great, but it all feels
Let me
weird.
turn off this ringing phone.
Yeah, yeah,
Give me 1 second.
absolutely.
I'll call you right back.
I can show you my screwdriver again. I also have a dusting Swiffer, which is kind of good. So here, I'll dust off the camera for you. Okay.
Sorry, Andrew. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I'm just gonna have a sip of my coffee. And from my video's reversed, but anyway, I think these are available. It's a nice mug, actually. I'm not doing it to promote the show. I'm doing it because I actually really like this mug. This is my everyday mug now.
Hi there.
Hey.
Sorry.
No worries. No worries at all. So, look, I got two more things about Dark Side of the Moon, then we can move on, if that's all right. But they're both slightly, I mean, I don't think it's going to be touchy, but one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit was Chris Thomas, if that's all right, coming in on that record. Because I know, like, there's bonus footage, and I went back and watched it yesterday just to make sure I had this right in my own head. In the bonus interview footage on the Classic Album series, they've very purposefully cut between you two, you talking about the not really wanting to compress too much and wanting to make sure everything stayed really open, and him talking about, yeah, and I just wanted to say, hey, can we try a compressor on that guitar? And like, so obviously a different sort of approach, but I don't know if that's just in the editing of it, or was it actually a very different approach to how you thought you were going to end up with that record going?
I mean, if you get the multi-tracks out, which I have had the opportunity to do a couple of times since the recording, it's really all there on the multi-tracks. I mean, it was just a case of balance, really,
right.
on the mix. So I mean, I think most of what you hear is there. I mean, of course, there's no reverb on anything, and there's delays missing, but the raw product is pretty much there.
Yeah.
I think on the 16 track, it was 16 track. Remember, not 24.
Right.
The philosophy that I had was that I would prefer not to compress the drums, and so I created two groups, a compressed group and a non-compressed group, and I think that's pretty much what we ended up for most of the album. I think there was one tune, but I can't remember which one it was, that did have slightly compressed drums on it as well.
Right.
But Chris was brought in to be the fresh ears, and so I was the engineer, not the producer. So I did what he asked, and between us we got it sounding really good.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's phenomenal, obviously, and it seemed as though from all the interviews I've seen that it was really that Roger and David were never going to agree unless they had someone sort of just come in and present them with something. And then they could almost not wash their hands of it, because they're obviously still very involved in it. But, I mean, I think there was one, I think it was Roger who was talking about how a couple of the songs were nothing like what he thought they were going to be. But in a way that was actually more liberating, because he could just say, oh, yep, that works. I'm feeling what I'm supposed to feel without having to figure it out. So, yeah.
I mean, they were, I think, almost without exception, they were all present for all the mixes. Not only just because they took a genuine interest in the mix, but they were extra hands to push things up and down, to change EQ, to add echo, whatever.
Right.
At a particular moment, because once again, we're pre-automation those days. Pre-digital, anything, no digital delays, all delays done with tape.
And I'd imagine there are a few songs where you're sharing tracks pretty regularly with 16 track.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So a lot to do.
We actually ended up second generation 16 track. I think in most cases the bass and drums were combined to a pair of tracks.
Right.
Bass and drums together. So. And then, of course, little effects and little pieces of dialogue would have to be slotted in a gap where there was a track available.
Right.
And obviously, not obviously, but often needing to be panned or treated differently to the other material on that same track.
Right. Well, okay. So
I remember we did do some mixing in sections. It was too much of an effort to get the entire song done in one pass. So we would do it up to a certain point, and stop, and then mark all the faders, and then move on to the next section and so on. That's a technique I did later in later years with Ambrosia in particular.
Right. When you're doing that, I'm just curious, would you always sort of mix in sequence, or were there times when you would mix choruses and then mix verses because of something that had to be so radically different?
Oh no, it would be in sequence.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, so it's just up to a point, reset, carry on.
Right.
Right.
Well, not so much reset as make sure you don't move anything going into the next session that would make it jump from the previous section.
Right. Right. And would you test edit immediately, or just you knew what you were doing at that point?
I don't think there was any need for test edits.
Yeah.
If it didn't work, we would just do it again.
Right.
as I remember, it was fine. Yeah.
All right. Well, one other thing about that record, because it's one of the best-selling records of all time. It has set records for being on the charts.